Amani N. George had it all. She worked at one of the best real estate firms in Nairobi, had a boyfriend who always talked about their future, and dreamed of starting her own company one day. Life felt safe and full of promise, until everything fell apart in just 1 week. It started when a jealous coworker blamed her for stealing company money. Before she could explain, her boss called her into the office, said he was disappointed, and fired her on the spot. Amani walked out in shock, carrying a box filled with files and framed memories of her hard work. When she called her boyfriend for comfort, his phone was off. Hours later, she found out he had cleared their joint savings account and disappeared. Shaking and desperate, she went home, hoping her parents would at least understand. Instead, they met her at the door with cold faces. Her father's voice cut deep when he said, "You've shamed this family." The door closed, and Amani was left standing in the rain, clutching that same box as if it could protect her from the world that had just turned against her. The city lights blurred through her tears. In that lonely moment, soaked and shivering, she finally understood how fast everything could be taken away. She had no job, no home, no money, and no one to call. But deep inside, under all the pain, a small voice whispered that this wasn't the end. Amani spent her first night on the cold metal bench of an old bus stop. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and every gust of wind made her shiver. She hugged her small box of belongings tightly, trying to convince herself this was only temporary. Across the street, she could see the tall glass tower of the real estate firm where she once worked. The building glowed beautifully under the city lights, and every time she looked at it, her heart ached. That used to be her world. She used to walk through those doors with confidence, dressed in smart heels, smiling at the receptionist. Now, she sat outside in the dark, invisible to everyone passing by. The days that followed were harder than she could have imagined. She walked the streets looking for work, but no one wanted to hire someone who had been accused of stealing. Her old friends stopped answering her calls, and she could feel the world moving on without her. Some nights, she went hungry. Other nights, she slept in a small park nearby, covering herself with old newspapers. Still, she refused to give up. When she finally got a small cleaning job at a cafe, she treated it like a lifeline. The pay was little, but it was honest. Each morning, she woke up early to sweep floors and wipe tables, and though her back hurt, she felt a quiet pride returning. One evening, as she rested at the bus stop after her shift, Amani took out her old phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She searched for free online courses and found one on business management. Something inside her lit up. Maybe this was her way out. Every night after work, she borrowed Wi-Fi from a nearby shop and studied under the dim streetlight. She learned about budgeting, marketing, and leadership. The more she learned, the more she began to dream again. She wasn't doing this just to prove anyone wrong, she was doing it to rebuild herself. Weeks turned into months. Amani saved every shilling she could, even skipping meals just to afford data bundles for her classes. The cafe owner noticed her hard work and gave her more hours. Slowly, she began to stand taller, speak more confidently, and smile again. People who had once ignored her started to greet her politely. But what she didn't know was that someone had already noticed her. One night, as she was cleaning the cafe's floor, a well-dressed woman sitting in the corner kept watching her quietly. The woman recognized her face but said nothing. Amani, lost in thought, hummed softly as she worked, unaware that this small moment was about to change everything. She had no idea that her strength, her calmness, and her quiet determination had caught the attention of someone powerful, someone who could open the door to the next chapter of her life. It was a quiet evening at the cafe, the kind of place where soft music played and the smell of coffee filled the air. Amani moved carefully between tables, cleaning up after the last few customers. Her uniform was worn, her hands rough from scrubbing floors, but she carried herself with quiet grace. She was wiping down a counter when she heard a sharp voice from the entrance. "I told you to wait in the car," a woman snapped. Amani froze. That voice sounded familiar. She turned slightly and saw a well-dressed woman in a gold shawl arguing with her driver. The woman's purse slipped from her hand, spilling papers and receipts across the shiny floor. Without thinking, Amani rushed over and knelt to help gather them. As she handed over the last folder, their eyes met. Both women froze for a moment. Amani felt her stomach tighten. It was Mrs. Kamau, the wife of her former boss, the man who had fired her and destroyed her reputation. For a second, Amani wanted to stand up and walk away. But something in Mrs. Kamau's face stopped her. The woman looked shocked at first, then guilty. You're Amani, aren't you?" she asked in a softer tone. "The one they said stole the company money?" Amani nodded slowly, her lips pressed together. She didn't try to defend herself. She had done that before and no one had listened. Instead, she simply said, "Yes, ma'am. That's me." Her voice was calm, steady, almost tired. Mrs. Kamau stared at her, her expression changing from surprise to something more human, curiosity, maybe even regret. "I'm so sorry for how things turned out," she murmured, looking at the papers in her hand instead of Amani's face. Amani gave a polite smile and stood up. "It's all right, ma'am. Things happen." She turned back to her cleaning, leaving Mrs. Kamau standing there, speechless. As Amani continued wiping the tables, she could feel the woman's eyes on her. Maybe it was guilt, maybe admiration, Amani couldn't tell. But she kept her head down and finished her work. When her shift ended, she stepped outside into the cool night air and let out a long breath. She didn't think much of the encounter. To her, it was just another strange reminder of how life could circle back unexpectedly. But that night, in her warm car, Mrs. Kamau couldn't stop thinking about Amani. She remembered how her husband had mentioned firing a dishonest employee, but now, after seeing Amani's quiet dignity and calm eyes, she began to question everything. There was no anger or bitterness in the young woman's face, only strength. That image stayed with her long after she got home. For the first time, she began to wonder if Amani had been telling the truth all along. And that thought, small as it was, would soon change both their lives forever. The next morning, Amani was mopping the cafe floor when her old, cracked phone began to ring. The number was unknown. She almost ignored it, thinking it was a wrong call, but something told her to answer. "Hello," she said softly. A calm, familiar voice replied, "Amani, it's Mrs. Kamau. Meet me at the Hilton rooftop tonight. 7 p.m. sharp." Before Amani could say a word, the line went dead. She froze, her heart racing. Why would her ex-boss's wife want to meet her? Was it some kind of trap? Or did she just want to pity her? Either way, Amani couldn't ignore it. All day, she couldn't focus on anything. She replayed their brief encounter at the cafe again and again. What did that look in Mrs. Kamau's eyes mean? By evening, Amani had changed into her cleanest clothes, a simple white blouse and faded jeans. She tied her hair neatly and walked to the Hilton, her stomach twisting with nerves. The city looked golden under the sunset, but Amani barely noticed. She kept asking herself what she would say if Mrs. Kamau brought up the past. When she reached the rooftop, she found Mrs. Kamau already there, sitting alone at a small table with a folder in front of her. The woman looked tired but calm. "You came," she said with a faint smile. Amani nodded, unsure whether to sit or stand. The silence stretched between them until Mrs. Kamau finally spoke. Her voice was low and careful. "Amani, you were never the thief." Amani blinked, thinking she had misheard. "What?" she whispered. Mrs. Kamau leaned closer, her eyes full of guilt. "It was my husband," she said softly. "He made you the scapegoat. The deal he blamed you for, it went wrong because of him. He moved the money, not you." The words hit Amani like lightning. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. All those nights she had cried, begged people to believe her, and now, here was the truth she had dreamed of hearing. He did that to me?" she asked in disbelief. Mrs. Kamau nodded, her voice trembling now. "I found out a few months ago. I saw the documents. I confronted him, but he denied everything. I kept quiet for too long, and I can't live with it anymore. I know what it cost you, your job, your family, your life. And I'm sorry." Amani sat down slowly, her hands shaking. She couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Mrs. Kamau pushed the folder toward her. "Because it's time to make things right. Everything you need is in there, proof of what he did. Use it. Do whatever you think is right." Amani looked down at the folder, her heart pounding. For the first time in a long time, she felt the fire return inside her. The truth was finally in her hands. And she wasn't going to waste it. That night, Amani sat in her small room staring at the folder on her lap. The sound of the city outside faded as she opened it carefully. Inside were papers, emails, and contracts, each one more shocking than the last. Mrs. Kamau hadn't been exaggerating. Her husband, Mr. Kamau, had built his success on lies. There were fake accounts, illegal deals, and secret payments to government officials. The more Amani read, the more her anger turned into determination. This was the proof she had prayed for. This was her chance to finally clear her name. The next day, Amani met with Mrs. Kamau again, this time in a quiet park where no one would recognize them. Mrs. Kamau wore sunglasses and spoke in a low voice. "If my husband finds out I gave you those files, he'll ruin me too," she said nervously. Amani nodded. "I won't let that happen," she promised. From that moment, the two women became partners in a secret mission. One was fighting for truth, the other for freedom. Together, they planned to expose the corruption that had destroyed so many lives. Days turned into nights as Amani worked tirelessly. She spread the documents across her small table, marking names, highlighting transactions, and making connections that even the police had missed. She taught herself how to read company statements and financial reports, scribbling notes in a worn notebook. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she refused to stop. Every signature, every bank transfer, every fake contract told a story that would soon shake Nairobi's biggest real estate firm to its core. Sometimes Mrs. Kamau would sneak out of her mansion late at night to meet Amani in secret. She'd bring more documents, flash drives, and even voice recordings. They'd sit in Amani's tiny room drinking cheap tea, whispering about the risks. "If we're caught, it's over," Mrs. Kamau would say. Amani would nod but smile faintly. "We've already lost once. I'm not afraid to lose again." Weeks passed, and Amani finally pieced everything together. What she uncovered was bigger than she had ever imagined. Mr. Kamau had not only framed her but also stolen millions from investors. He had bribed officials, faked property titles, and moved money overseas. The corruption ran deep, touching powerful names across the city. Amani realized that exposing him wouldn't just take down a man, it could take down an entire company, maybe even destroy reputations at the highest level. One night, she sat staring at the files, her hands trembling. Was she ready for this? Once she revealed the truth, there would be no going back. But then she remembered that night in the rain, her parents turning her away, her boss calling her a thief, her boyfriend disappearing with her money. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from power. She whispered to herself, "He took everything from me. Now it's my turn." And with that, the plan began. Weeks later, the day Amani had been waiting for finally came. Mr. Kamau's company was hosting a big investors' meeting at a fancy hotel in Nairobi. The city's richest and most powerful people were there, politicians, business leaders, and reporters. Everyone expected another grand speech from the CEO, full of lies about how well the company was doing. But none of them had any idea what was about to happen. Outside the hotel, Amani stood in a simple navy blue dress, holding a small flash drive tightly in her hand. Her heart was pounding, but her eyes were calm. She had spent nights preparing for this moment, checking every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the truth. When the meeting started, the room was filled with chatter and fake smiles. Mr. Kamau stood at the podium, bragging about new projects and profits. Then the doors at the back opened, and everyone turned. Amani walked in slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. For a second, the room fell silent. The last time most of them had seen her, she was being escorted out of the office in tears. Now she walked in with her head high. Mr. Kamau froze mid-sentence. "What is this?" he snapped, his voice tight. Amani stepped forward. "You fired me without hearing the truth," she said clearly, her voice steady. "But today, everyone will hear it." Gasps spread across the room. The investors exchanged confused looks, but Amani didn't flinch. She walked up to the projector, plugged in her flash drive, and clicked play. In an instant, the giant screen behind Mr. Kamau filled with documents, bank records, emails, signed contracts, and voice recordings. Every piece pointed to one thing: his corruption. The room went silent except for the sound of the recordings playing his own voice discussing fake deals. People began whispering, shocked and angry. A few investors stood up, demanding answers. Mr. Kamau's face turned pale. "This is nonsense," he shouted. But Amani stood tall. "The evidence speaks for itself," she said quietly. Within minutes, the hotel doors opened again, this time with police officers walking in. Mrs. Kamau had made sure they were ready. The officers approached the stage, showing a warrant. Mr. Kamau tried to argue, but his words were useless. The crowd watched in disbelief as the once powerful man was handcuffed and led away. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and chaos filled the room. As the police took him out, Mr. Kamau turned his head and saw Amani standing there, calm and unshaken. His eyes widened in shock. The woman he had humiliated, fired, and blamed for his crimes had just destroyed his empire. Amani didn't say a word. She simply looked at him, then turned away. The whispers in the room grew louder, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free. The story of Amani's bravery spread across Nairobi faster than anyone could have imagined. By the next morning, every major newspaper had her picture on the front page: former employee exposes corrupt CEO. On social media, her name was trending. People shared her story, calling her a hero who had stood up for justice even after losing everything. For the first time in months, Amani didn't feel invisible. She walked through the city streets with her head high, and strangers stopped her to say, "You inspired us." The same people who once looked down on her now looked up to her with admiration. News reporters tried to chase her for interviews, but Amani stayed humble. She didn't crave attention. All she wanted was peace, and a chance to start over. Still, her courage caught the eyes of many business leaders who respected what she had done. One by one, investors began reaching out, offering to meet her. They saw honesty in her story, and they wanted to work with someone who had proven she could stand firm in a world full of corruption. Then one day, Amani received an email that made her heart skip a beat. It was from a well-known real estate firm, the same one that had rejected her application years ago when she'd first dreamed of starting her own company. The message was short but powerful: "We believe in your vision. Let's build something great together." Amani stared at the screen, smiling through tears. Life had come full circle. With their support, she began working on her dream project, a real estate company built on trust, transparency, and fairness. She called it Njorage Estates, naming it after her family to reclaim the name that had once been associated with shame. Her mission was simple: to give young people, especially women, a chance to grow in business without fear of exploitation. She hired hard-working women who had also been underestimated, giving them the opportunities she once wished she'd had. Within months, Enjorage estates began to rise quickly. Clients were drawn to Amani's honesty and the way she treated everyone with respect. Investors praised her integrity, saying she was the future of real estate in Nairobi. The same media outlets that once reported her downfall were now celebrating her success. Billboards around the city showed her smiling face with the words, "Built on truth. Powered by resilience." Every time Amani walked into her new office, she remembered where she had started, the rainy night outside her parents' house, the long days cleaning floors, and the pain of being called a thief. But now, all of that had turned into fuel for her growth. Her name, once broken and whispered with pity, had become a symbol of strength and survival. Amani had not only rebuilt her life, she had rewritten her story. A year later, the lights of Nairobi glittered brighter than ever as guests arrived at the grandest hotel in the city for a charity gala hosted by none other than Amani Enjorage. The same hotel where she had once mopped floors now displayed her name in shining gold letters at the entrance. She stood by the doors, dressed in an elegant gown, greeting leaders, celebrities, and investors who had come to support her foundation for young women in business. Everywhere she looked, she saw smiles, admiration, and respect, things she once thought she'd lost forever. When it was time for her speech, the music faded and all eyes turned to her. Amani walked up to the stage with steady steps, her heart full. As she reached the microphone, the audience rose to their feet, clapping loudly. For a moment, she couldn't speak, the sound of their applause brought tears to her eyes. Then, from the crowd, she spotted Mrs. Kamau standing near the front, smiling warmly. The same woman who had once watched her scrub floors was now cheering her on like family. After the event, Mrs. Kamau approached her, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "You did it." Amani smiled softly and shook her head. "No," she said, her voice full of emotion. "We did it." They hugged tightly, both knowing how far they had come from the shadows of the past. Cameras flashed all around them, capturing the moment. Within hours, pictures of Amani's speech spread across social media, celebrated across Africa as a story of strength, grace, and second chances. The woman who had once been fired, betrayed, and left with nothing had risen higher than anyone imagined, and she was just getting started.